husband Brian likes to keep himself busy since he was made redundant. I told him he needed to find another job, but he said he didn't want to. He said we'd manage somehow money-wise and he'd find plenty to do to fill his time. Well, I thought to myself, I bloody well hope so. He took up bowling first, bought all the gear, bowling balls, woods they like to call them, shoes, whites, you know, all that stuff. Cost a fortune. But I have to say, he looked the part, even if he couldn't bowl. Well, he's never been good at sport, never been good at, well, anything really, but it meant that sometimes I had the house to myself, and you have to be grateful for small mercies. Unfortunately, when his back went, he decided to mothball his bowls and took up sailing instead. Well, not real sailing, he couldn't do that even if his back had let him. No, those toy ones. Replicas, he insisted on calling them. Only needed his wellies and his warm coat for that. Oh, and 2 long poles. He sailed his boat up and down the reservoir, him and the sad old git from down the road who never married. They'd stand one either side and reach out with their poles to turn the sail so it went back the other way. Do you see what I mean? Tacking, they called it, up and down, hour after hour. It was quite a big boat, all string and sails and expensive. It cost him best part of £100. But to be honest, I couldn't wait to get him out of the house. Well, it wasn't long before he got sick of the boat, or should I say, he got sick of his friend. Or to be more precise, his friend got sick of him. They fell out. Well, he fell in, his friend I mean, and instead of being sympathetic, Brian, in his usual tactful way, called him an ham-fisted bloody moron for losing his pole in the water. And he left him to walk home, alone, dripping wet in a bitter cold wind. They haven't spoken since, and he couldn't do it on his own, so he sold the boat. Well, this meant he was at home all the time, and I couldn't stand having him under my feet. So I was quite happy for him to do whatever he wanted, so long as it didn't cost any money and didn't involve me. But I was absolutely gobsmacked when he suddenly announced he was going to breed budgies in a hut down on the allotment. He said it would make us a fortune breeding and selling them, as if. So he went on the internet and looked up how to do it. A local handyman erected a wire mesh frame on the side of the hut he'd bought. He had breeding boxes, incubators and all the other paraphernalia. He spent a fortune, he did, but that's him. To my surprise, it worked well, too well. In no time, he was knee-deep in bloody blue and green budgies. So he put an advert in the paper and on Facebook. Well, you can imagine how I felt when a few months later, he said that because he couldn't find any buyers, he was going to have to give them away and look for something else to fill his time. After spending a fortune, all that money down the drain, well, it didn't bear thinking about. Do you know what he did next? He arrived home with one of the bloody things in a cage. He said it was called Smiler, and he was keeping it as a pet. Smiler? What kind of a sodding name is that for a bird? Now, I not only had him at home, I had his bloody budgie as well. Anyway, ignoring my pleas for him to get rid of it, he set it up in a fancy cage in our front room. He knew damn well their flapping wings and their sharp little beaks scared the life out of me, and yet he insisted on letting it out. It'd fly onto the curtains, the lights, the back of the furniture and drop shit all over the place. It'd even try to land on my head and get tangled up in my hair. Oh, the silly bugger laughed when I screamed for him to get it off me, and I grew to hate it. Really, really hate it. To be fair, it grew to hate me too, and even though I pleaded with him to get rid of the dirty thing, he said it was his pet. And as I had 2 cats, I couldn't complain, so I had to put up with it. But the cats are like him, old and fat, and they sit around all day doing nothing. But how I wish they'd eat the sodding thing. Well, I was at the end of my tether, what with him at home all day and the bloody budgie flying about, my life wasn't worth living. I decided this time he'd overstepped the mark and something had to be done. There was an advert in the paper for a clairvoyant with a picture of her, Gypsy Rose Lily. She had an headscarf, long painted fingernails and them curtain rail earrings. She lived in a caravan up on the cliffs. Lover's Leap, they called it. So unbeknown to him, I rang her and arranged for a reading the following Tuesday afternoon. That's my day for going shopping, and I knew I could nip round the supermarket fast and he'd never know I'd been. Well, her caravan's miles from anywhere. Good walk away from the town, but it only takes 10 minutes on the bus. How she got permission to put it there beats me, but I suppose it had been on top of the cliff for so long nobody thought to tell her to move it. It was a sad-looking thing sitting there in the sandy ground with long straggly grass growing under it, and inside the floor wasn't level, so she had wedges under all the furniture. She led me in up the rickety steps, but with only a couple of candles lighting the place, so I couldn't see much. It stunk of cigarette smoke and whiskey, and so did she. Anyway, there I was, sitting in the gloom, with one aching buttock balanced on a little stool, with her peering intently into the palm of my hand and saying, "Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear." I was dying to know what it was she was oh dearing about, but I knew I weren't supposed to speak, so I kept my mouth shut. Eventually she said, "I'm afraid it isn't good news, my dear." And she went into a coughing fit that she immediately apologised for. She started to talk about planets being in opposition and worlds colliding, and she used words like conflict and foreboding. And then she went into a sort of a trance with her eyes half shut and her head tilted back, and I waited. All of a sudden, she threw her head forward, opened her eyes wide and gave a sort of sobbing gasp and said, "I see black shapes across a dark sky." She threw her arms in the air and then dropped them on her head and moaned. "I see feathers. I hear wailing and screaming. I see..." She shot to her feet and put her hands over her mouth, and again I waited for her to say something, but she didn't. By now, I was shaking from head to foot and I couldn't stand it any longer. I rose to my feet. "What is it?" I mumbled. "Is it something bad?" The little coin she'd embroidered in her headscarf jangled as she nodded her head. "I see an empty space, conflict and death," she moaned through her fingers. "Really?" I said, then asked, "Has a budgie got anything to do with it?" "Budgie?" she rasped, her painted-on eyebrows arching upwards. "We have one as a pet. Maybe that's the feathers you mentioned earlier." Well, quick as a flash, she motioned for me to sit, took out a pack of dog-eared tarot cards and dealt some out on the tiny table. It was a bit dingy sitting there in the candlelight, but I could see an angel, someone hanging by their feet, a naked lady stepping into a pond, and a skeleton. I see water. I see injury in a deep black pit. I see murder. Then she took a dirty cloth from her cleavage, wiped the candle drips off the cards, looked at her watch and proceeded to tell me the session was over, and if I wanted to know more, I was to come back another time. "And it might be advisable to bring something associated with your husband and the bird," she insisted. Before I could say a word, she ushered me down the rickety steps and slammed the door. Well, I wasn't impressed, not after travelling all that way with no further clue as to what to do about Smiler. But a week or so later, when things at home got worse and worse, and I really was at my wit's end, I did go again. I thought one last try wouldn't do no harm. I took with me a photo of Brian with his evil damn budgie on his shoulder. She looked shocked and had to slip on her glasses for a better look. Then she went on about danger and dark places and fear and conflict and stuff like that. But she seemed a little distracted, and before I knew it, my time was up. She said nothing that I felt would help me get rid of evil Smiler, so I decided I'd definitely not go again. He knew nothing about this, of course, Brian I mean. He would have thought 40 quid for 2 sessions too steep, not that he ever hesitates to spend money on himself. What I haven't told you is that Brian goes out every Thursday afternoon for a few hours without fail, rain or shine, to the library to change his books. Of course I don't go. I look forward to having time on my own. As soon as he's gone, I lock the damn bird in his cage and then ring a friend of mine, Roger. I met him when I was in the waiting room at the doctor's. He had an ingrowing toenail and I was there with my varicose veins, and somehow we got talking. He's a single man, lives on his own, and he let me have his phone number. Well, that was 7 years ago, and although we never met again, we've talked for hours on the phone. And we've never run short of things to say. He knows never to ring me because of Brian, because of his short temper, because it's one thing I have that's my own, apart from the cats. But we both look forward to our Thursday chats. Well, it was after one of these phone calls, when I was settling down to watch some daytime telly, that I suddenly realised I'd left the photo of Brian with his damn precious budgie in Gypsy Rose Lily's caravan. At first I thought, what the hell? I didn't want it. But then I panicked and I thought, what if he misses it? So I decided I'd better go back and get it. It was a Thursday, library day, and I knew I could get there and back before he came home. So when Brian went off in the car, I rang Roger to say I had to go out and would ring him later. He was very understanding. I took the bus out of town and walked the half-mile or so to Lover's Leap. You can imagine my surprise when I saw our car parked outside a caravan. I thought, what the hell's he doing there? And then I panicked. I thought, oh, he's checking up on me. But then I thought, hang on a minute. I bet the bugger's having his palm read after telling me he didn't believe in such tripe. I crept up and looked in the window. He was in there all right, but it wasn't his palm she was interested in. His coat was over the back of a chair, as were the rest of his clothes. They were both, well, at it. Right there on the caravan sloping floor, and his back weren't stopping him either. I stood stock still, stunned. As I turned to walk away, I saw a piece of rope sticking out from the back wheels. It was tied to 2 wooden blocks that were stopping her caravan from rolling off down the bank, and I thought, why not? And without thinking, I gave it a good old yank. I didn't really expect him to come out. It was more of an angry gesture. But I suppose because the ground was so sandy, they slid out easily. And off it went, down the slope. Slowly at first, but then gathering speed until it disappeared over the edge of the cliff. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I waited and waited. And after what seemed like an eternity, there was a faint crash. Then, only the sound of the waves. Lover's Leap, good name. I didn't go to look. I left the car and walked all the way back home. Took me best part of 3 hours across the fields, through the woods and out by the cemetery, but I'm sure no one saw me. I was feeling strangely liberated, as if my whole life were about to change. As I walked, I thought about what I'd do and decided that as soon as I got home, I'd ring Roger and tell him all about it. Ask him to help me, be my alibi. Then I'd stay on the phone till the police arrived. I was sure I could act the grieving wife. I'd just lie, say I hadn't been out. They'd be bound to believe me. I'll arrange to meet Roger when everything dies down. In fact, soon I'll be able to do whatever I like. Brian was well insured, so no more scrimping and saving and having to go to him for money. And as I walked, I smiled and I thought, you're next, Smiler, you're next.